The Kickstarter has about a week left in it. We hit $1 million last week, which is just a huge, enormous milestone, a huge celebration for us. I think this company is going to be okay, everybody. We'll see. Stay tuned. Hitting $1 million meant we unlocked RELG. RELG is a demon miniature we're going to be making. He's going to be quite large. It's going to be a very big miniature, a big heavy chunk of resin. RELG is one of the villains of my ongoing Chain of Acheron campaign. You met him in the first episode of the Chain of Acheron, where he killed and ate Lars's character. Can start with a bang. And it was somebody in the Discord after the Kickstarter launched and they saw how it was doing that said, hey, it would be cool if RELG was the last thing to be unlocked. And I read that and thought, that would be cool. And so I talked to Jason, our art director, and he said, that would be cool. And so we contacted an artist, Mike Franchina, the same guy that did a bunch of the devils for us. And in about 24 to 48 hours, we had this fantastic piece of concept art that we're already in the process of modeling. I'm super excited. RELG, that is a miniature that has a lot of personality, and I'm looking forward to designing it. We're going to use for RELG the action-oriented design. That was a big hit from the last Running the Game episode. If you go on Reddit, especially the /r/Matt Colville subreddit, there are dozens of monsters that people have reskinned using action-oriented design, and I think it's a big success. In fact, a little addendum, one of the things that folks who've used that action-oriented design have discovered is that one of your monster abilities, whether it's their villain action or maybe a reaction or a bonus action, needs to have something to do with positioning. Because what tends to happen in these solo and boss monster fights is that the heroes just swarm the boss, and then the battle becomes a lot less dynamic. All motion stops. So if you want to keep that feeling of things happening in the battle and motion, you either need to give your bad guy the ability to push the heroes or teleport the heroes away, or move through them, or move without provoking attacks of opportunity. So that I thought was really good advice and a good reaction to the video. So you can check out those action-oriented monsters on the subreddit, and all of that is going to inform the design of all these creatures in Kingdoms and Warfare. Speaking of those monsters, we now have a near final sculpt of Pharyon, the Prince of Dis, who is the Lord of the Court of Seven Cities, the Court of Devils. This is the work of our friend John Gotch with a little bit of work from Jason thrown in. Pharyon is an eye devil, and if you look closely, you can see he's got eyes all over him, and I'm super excited. This is going to be a very large mini, one of the largest ones we're doing. Pharyon, like RELG, and many of these monsters, but not all, are going to be very high CR monsters, and so almost certainly they're going to use that action-oriented design when Kingdoms and Warfare comes out. That's the state of the Kickstarter. Like I said, about a week left. And the Player's Guide to Capital, which is a 48-page, very high-level overview of the city of Capital, the city that the Chain of Acheron takes place in, is in the process of being assigned to writers even as we speak. We got hundreds of people applying for the gig, of which like 30 to 40 I thought were well qualified. And then from that, I picked 4 and said, hey, do you want to help write this book? And all of them said yes. So I'm super excited to get this manuscript in front of you folks. I don't imagine the Player's Guide to Capital is going to be an actual physical product at only 48 pages. It would have to be soft cover. It might just be PDF. But if it does well, if people are interested in it, then it will almost certainly end up turning into a larger, maybe even a hardcover or a boxed product. Who knows? But enough of that bookkeeping. We are here to talk about inspiration. Hey, everybody, Matt Colville here. Hey, everybody, Matt Colville here. Hey, everybody, Matt Colville here. The DM's Guide says we award inspiration whenever players take actions that make the game more exciting, amusing, or memorable. Okay, that is usefully broad. It means we are free to award inspiration for basically any positive reason, and that's part of what we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about different uses for inspiration. So part 1, when do we award it? And part 2, what can it be used for? And because I think part 2 is more interesting, we're going to do part 2 first, even though that doesn't make any literal sense, and this is just a script I wrote, and I could have reversed the order, but it's my video. I can do what I want. So the rule for using inspiration is pretty clear and unambiguous. It gives you advantage, which you can use on an ability check or attack roll or saving throw. And since 5th edition is deliberately abstruse about the existence of skill checks, that also means skill checks. And this is something you could use in any role-playing game. Doesn't have to be roll 2d20s, take the highest. Any RPG you might run, you are free to award a player with some benefit when they do something suitably cool. But why only advantage? Couldn't we just decide at our table inspiration could be used for other things? Of course we can. But what other things? All of this stuff is speculative. I haven't tested these ideas. These are just thoughts I have had. Use at your own risk. And I can tell you right now, some of these ideas will be more useful depending on your table. Stuff that seems completely unworkable for some groups can be totally normal for others. But that's true of inspiration in general. Some groups use it a lot. some literally never use it, and all the people in both of those groups are having fun. Something I think would be incredibly useful and not meaningfully different than the current system is allowing players to spend their inspiration to impose disadvantage on an enemy's attack roll, saving throw, or ability check. There are tactical moments where this could be very dramatic. We've had several situations at my table where everyone knew whoever hit next would drop their opponent. In that scenario, being able to impose disadvantage on an attack roll is not only powerful, it's also pretty dramatic. But mostly I think this is useful for spellcasters who want to make it more likely their spells work. Characters who use weapons like advantage. But if your cool stuff relies on your enemies failing their saving throws, is advantage really useful? Disadvantage on an enemy's saving throw is not exactly the same as advantage on an attack roll. Most spells that require saving throws are just more powerful than any normal weapon attack, but it's the same basic idea. My stuff is more likely to work. And what's wrong with that? Of all the options we cover in this video, I think this is the least risky. Whatever the result of the disadvantaged saving throw is, you could have rolled that without disadvantage. So it's dramatic, it feels cool, but it produces results that could have happened in the ordinary course of play. How dangerous can it be? What about turning a hit into a crit? This doesn't seem that crazy to me. Allow a player to use inspiration to turn a hit into a critical. At the end of the day, what have you actually changed? The player could have rolled a 20 just then anyway. This seems like the kind of thing that players would like. It helps them feel badass, but it wouldn't actually change your game that much. And remember, in case you have a Githyanki Battlemaster walking around with a Vorpal Sword in your game, a Vorpal Sword only decapitates on a natural 20, not a crit. So those options don't seem that crazy to me. What about using inspiration to do more on your turn? What about letting a player use inspiration to get another attack? And that seems like a bigger, more unbalancing change to me. We're talking about a weapon attack or a spell that requires an attack roll. More attacks seems more powerful than advantage. But is it? Really, inspiration just represents an increase in the likelihood of success. But how do we measure success? Well, if we're rolling dice, then we're usually talking about combat. So wouldn't it be just as useful if it meant the player got to attack again or cast another spell on their turn, just more likely to win this combat or win it faster? Especially since, depending on the scenario, advantage on an attack roll or ability check might not be that useful. Players often get themselves into scenarios where they know they're going to hit. Many powerful enemies are easy to hit. Success is just a question of how often and how much damage. So a free attack in that situation can be as useful as advantage is normally. One reason this might be legitimately problematic is that gaining extra attacks is the purview of certain class abilities and spells. And if there are other easier ways to do it, then those characters are going to feel less useful. But I think depending on your table, you could try this and players would like it and it wouldn't necessarily break your game. Something else you could try that I don't think would break anything is letting a player spend their inspiration to get an extra reaction. This is way more situational. How often do characters take reactions? Mostly it's in attacks of opportunity, but a lot of class abilities and some spells are reactions. And off the top of my head, I can't think of any that are so crazy powerful that getting to do one more once would be game breaking. This is the kind of thing I'd certainly at least try at my table before freaking out and saying it would never work. So those are some mechanical things we can imagine inspiration doing: imposing disadvantage, turning a hit into a crit, or gaining an extra attack or reaction. But does inspiration have to be purely mechanical? What about letting a player character actually be inspired? It's called inspiration, right? Why not let a player cash in inspiration to figure something out? Is this a radical idea? We already have insight. A player can make an insight check to see if a flash of inspiration strikes their character. That's perfectly reasonable. So why not let them use their actual inspiration to just decide it works and they figure out whatever it is they're trying to solve? I would still require the player to give me a reason their character has some flash of insight. I'm not a huge fan of players using special abilities or die rolls to get out of the messy business of role-playing and describing what their character does. Even just skill checks. If they roll to persuade someone, they still have to tell me how they're being persuasive. Same thing here. How are you gaining this insight? We're just trying to encourage the player to be creative with their character. And I wouldn't let a player just toss in inspiration to solve the mysteries of the universe or discover gunpowder or whatever. I would just treat it as succeeding on an insight check. I guess I use insight more broadly than the player's handbook says. It describes insight as being for determining a character's motives, what they used to more accurately call sense motive. But I let players make insight checks for anything they might reasonably discover through a flash of insight. Like an insight check, I would only expect this to work on problems the players are actively trying to solve, and I might say you can only use inspiration to figure it out after other avenues have been tried. But under those restraints, I definitely think this would work. On paper, you can imagine players abusing this, a puzzle that was supposed to be a challenge they don't even bother with, they just use inspiration. And yeah, that would be a problem, but I think it depends on your group and how you play. I use insight pretty broadly, and so far no one's tried to game my implementation of it. A lot of theory crafting, especially online, involves identifying edge cases that seem plausible, but which never actually come up at the table. All right, so if we're letting players use inspiration to affect the flow of the narrative, why not go the whole way? What about if 3 players agree to throw in their inspiration, they can overrule the dungeon master? No, it doesn't happen that way, and then change the course of the narrative. This may seem story-breaking, but remember, it's our job as dungeon masters to provide a narrative framework for the players' stories, not ours. Why shouldn't they be able to take the reins for this one moment, and if they pool their inspiration, change the outcome of events? I love this. It would be exciting to see something like this happen, and maybe 3 players is too few, or maybe 1 player would be enough. Easy to change as you play around with it. I don't know the first time I ever saw a game give the players the power to overrule the DM, but I think it was in Torg back in 1990, which had a deck of cards, the drama deck, and one of the cards just said, No, that's not what happens, Matt Colville. I am going to decide. I like requiring multiple players to cash in their inspiration for this because it makes it collaborative. They have to agree, which means they have to talk about it. And that discussion would be very interesting. They have to agree to use it, and they have to agree what outcome they're looking for. I think that would be a blast. Okay, so those were a bunch of different things you could do with inspiration, any of which I think might work depending on your table, and probably you could allow your players to pick what happens when they use inspiration. And if you feel like, yeah, some of these alternative uses for inspiration are cool, but they should be more rare than normal inspiration, well, you could always use different tokens for those. I like these tokens from campaign coins we got from Deven. I'll put a link in the doobly-doo. It's not an affiliate link. There are no kickbacks or anything, just a recommendation. You can have regular inspiration that works as normal, and then super inspiration for extraordinary feats that unlock more uses. But how does one earn inspiration? Well, there are the obvious ways laid out in the DMG, good role-playing, acts of heroism, rewarding victory, or playing along with the genre, which they call genre emulation. Those are all great. But something I was thinking about, I've already done this once or twice and it seems to work, is awarding inspiration for unblocking a jam. I often put scenarios in front of my players with literally no thought given to how they might solve it. So they sit around and debate, and the debate ranges all over the place. They come up with a ton of different ideas and weird theories. How can I, as the GM, influence that discussion, guide things toward a solution that makes sense and which has a chance of working? Well, I have a lot of tools. I have NPCs who can weigh in. I can ask for skill checks for the players to remember something they forgot. But I also have inspiration. I think it's perfectly legitimate to tell a player, hey, that's a cool idea. Here's inspiration. I'm not saying your idea is going to work. There will still be die rolls involved. It is a game. I'm just saying, gosh, that's cool. A cool idea is worth inspiration, even if it doesn't pan out. Well, maybe that's a bad reason to award inspiration. Maybe that means the players will think, oh, I guess this is what we're supposed to do. Yep, that is a real danger. So maybe this is a bad idea, but you can try it and see what happens. I mean, this is a game. There aren't lives at stake. I've done it a couple of times and it worked great in my campaign. And so far, none of the players have interpreted me awarding inspiration for a cool idea as that's the right answer, or that's the best idea, or that will definitely work. But it could happen. It depends on your group. That's the inspiration video, folks. Just more things you could do with inspiration and maybe a new reason to award it. The goal is just to make inspiration more fun, more useful for the players, and maybe even more useful for you. Thanks for watching, everybody. The Kickstarter is still running. Tons of cool stuff to check out. And we have a store if you want a t-shirt or a book about building strongholds and recruiting followers for 5th edition. Next video, we talk about what it really means when you decide to be a dungeon master and the act of leading a creative life. Not a running the game video, but maybe an important video nonetheless. Until then, peace out.